Hi, I'm Matt Donnelly from RotoBaller, and it's time to talk about those Week 4 starts and sits at the tight end position. I'm basically talking about Sam Laporta and whoever Taylor Swift is dating as tight ends that you could feel good about on a weekly basis. Last week in the Chargers and Vikings game, we had a pair of Donald Parham scores, as well as a Josh Oliver tutty. Some Farrell Brown, who's not even a real Farrell, I fact-checked this, believe it or not, ended up with 15 fantasy points. And even Brevin Jordan, who's one of my Dynasty mustache players, get it? Mustache. From a couple of years ago, he got in on the action as well. With that being said, we know that the tight end position is a complete crapshoot each and every week, but I'm going to give you 4 tight ends that I trust entering week number 4, starting with Luke Musgrave of the Green Bay Packers versus the Detroit Lions. Musgrave, he's coming off a contest in which he registered 8 targets, hauling in 6 of them for 49 yards, which, believe it or not, was a tight end 1 type week in fantasy against a very difficult matchup in New Orleans. This week he faces a Lions team that allowed 5 receptions on 9 targets to Kyle Pitts, who finished with 41 yards, and yet, get this, another tight end 1 type fantasy week. That's all it takes these days, is 41 yards and 5 catches, and you are going to be a top 12 tight end. Now, Detroit has allowed 253 yards to opposing tight ends and have allowed the second most fantasy points, allowing on average 18.3 per game to the position. Another tight end that I feel comfortable starting this week, believe it or not, is Njoku versus the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm really basically trying to will this into existence because I needed this to happen. Truth is, the Titans offense is an absolute mess. The good news, the Bengals are one of those teams that are allowing tight ends to produce for the most part this season, ranking inside the top 5 when it comes to fantasy points allowed to the position thus far this season. And I'm willing to make one more excuse for Okonkwo as it fits my personal narrative here. But we did see that the Titans, they basically put 2 tight ends in motion to help block Myles Garrett last week. Something they certainly don't have to do or worry about when they play Cincinnati. Another tight end that I'm starting is Kyle Pitts versus Jacksonville. I'm not entirely sure why I continue to do this to myself. Even last week, I swore off Pitts after he just produced 41 yards, which was a great matchup against the Detroit Lions, but again, that was somehow a top 12 fantasy week. Truly a testament about how bad that the tight end position is in fantasy. This week, he gets another favorable matchup against the Jaguars team that is allowing 15.83 fantasy points per game to tight ends and has given up a pair of scores in the first 3 weeks. And finally, speaking of the Jacksonville Jaguars, how about Evan Ingram versus the Atlanta Falcons? Kyle Pitts is not the only tight end that you can be targeting in this Falcons-Jaguars contest. Evan Ingram is another must start as the Falcons are allowing 15.23 fantasy points to the position and have also yielded a pair of scores of their own. While Travis Etienne was basically the Jaguars' complete offense last week, Ingram was the only other Jaguar pass catcher to provide any sort of offense, hauling in 7 of 8 targets for 67 yards, which was easily going to be good enough to be a top 12 tight end any given week when we're looking at this fantasy landscape. So which tight ends are you sitting this week? Well, I'm going to give you 3 bigger name tight ends that I'm not entirely trusting, as their matchups are very difficult, starting with Mark Andrews versus the Cleveland Browns. Let's be honest, in today's tight end economy, you cannot afford to sit Mark Andrews, but you should at least consider it, as the Browns have allowed just 7 receptions for 26 yards this season. Then again, outside of Pat Fairmouth, it's not like Okonkwo or Irv Smith are considered top tight ends in the league, at least thus far this season. Then again, it's not like Mark Andrews' 7 fantasy point performance last week screams, "Start me right now," because it doesn't. You cannot trust Mark Andrews either. Also, who you can't trust is the other tight end in this Ravens-Browns matchup, and that is David Njoku. 4 catches for 20 yards from what was supposed to be a consensus top 12 tight end entering the season. Even Jimmy Graham had a touchdown last week. Like Mark Andrews facing the Browns, Njoku is facing a Ravens team, which is bad news for fantasy tight ends and their production. Baltimore is the second most difficult matchup in fantasy for the tight end position behind the aforementioned Browns team, allowing just 4.17 fantasy points per game, and they have only allowed 45 yards in 3 games. And finally, you're also sitting Hunter Henry versus the Dallas Cowboys. Now, there's other tight ends that you're sitting way before Hunter Henry, but buyer beware. Those guys are way too obvious. And the Dallas Cowboys, they are reeling after a loss to the Cardinals last week. Yes, those very same Arizona Cardinals. And unfortunately for New England and McCorkle Jones and Hunter Henry, this Dallas Cowboys team will be looking for retribution this week. The Cowboys have allowed just 112 receiving yards to the position and have yet to yield a touchdown. And they are among the top 10 defenses in fantasy when it comes to defending tight ends. Week 4 tight ends that you're starting: Kelsey, Hawkinson, Sam Laporta. If healthy, you're starting these guys each and every week. You're also starting Luke Musgrave. The band is back together in Green Bay, and Jordan Love has looked pretty good so far this season. Chigakonkwo, he's going to get cheeky with it this week, as he doesn't have to worry about doubling up on Myles Garrett. Kyle Pitts, one more time, I want to celebrate you. Please don't make me look a fool. Evan Ingram finished 2022 as the top option in this passing game for the Jaguars. He is also looking to be the most dependable target here so far in 2023. I'm sitting Mark Andrews and David Njoku this week as the Browns and the Ravens face off in an AFC North divisional showdown. These are the two top defenses when it comes to defending the opposing tight ends, so it's going to be tough to trust either one of these guys at all this week. And Hunter Henry, he may not be facing the Browns or the Ravens, but the Cardinals kick the hornet's nest with this Cowboys defense, which is going to be buzzing this week. And I want you all to be buzzing over to the RotoBaller YouTube channel for plenty more fantasy football analysis.